After attaining enlightenment under the Bodhi tree, Buddha Shakyamuni expounded the truths he had realized for the first time. These truths are known as the Four Noble Truths: the truth of suffering, the truth of the origin of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, and the truth of the path. The first noble truth is the truth of suffering. Truth means reality. The Buddha taught that sentient beings experience three types of suffering: the suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, and all-pervasive suffering. Our lives are filled with these three types of suffering. Those who haven't learned them cannot understand the truth of suffering. Only by thoroughly understanding the truth of suffering can we truly embark on the path to liberation. The first step in practicing the path to liberation is to comprehend the truth of suffering. All-pervasive suffering. As human beings, we all wish to live freely. Hence, we instinctively pursue freedom. However, we have a big misconception. We believe that when we have desires and the means such as money, power, or time to fulfill them, we consider it freedom. For example, if you want to buy a car and have the money to do so, you may think this is freedom. If you enjoy racing and buy a sports car to participate in races, you may think this is freedom. If you want to travel and have the money and time to travel, you may think this is freedom. But please ponder, is it really freedom? When desires arise, you don't have the choice. You are compelled to find ways to fulfill them. Otherwise, you will feel a sense of discomfort and compulsion. This sense of compulsion is definitely not freedom. Wise individuals understand that such desires are a force of karmic habits. This force pulls you towards wanting to do something. However, wanting to do something is not your freedom. Freedom is being at ease with either doing something or not doing it. We don't wish to fall ill, grow old, get angry, leave loved ones, or lose them. Many things in life are against our wishes, but do we have a choice? Do we have freedom? When confronted with natural disasters such as earthquakes and epidemics, do we have a choice? Do we have freedom? Furthermore, in our daily lives, when we are tired, we have to sleep. When we are hungry, we have to eat. Do we have a choice? Do we have freedom? Sentient beings are clouded by ignorance. From ignorance arises blind motions. From blind motions arise wandering minds. From wandering minds arise actions, and from actions arise karma. The repetition of karma gives rise to karmic habits. Due to the power of karmic habits, they cannot control themselves, lack freedom, and feel compelled. This is all-pervasive suffering. Mountains move, valleys change, seas become fields. Youthful faces of the past are now adorned with grey hair. Emotions fluctuate between joy and sorrow, laughter and anger. Day and night rotate. Winter and summer alternate. Cloudy or sunny, dark or bright, the weather is unpredictable. The sun and moon are chasing after each other. Life is filled with cycles of wealth and poverty, gains and losses, rise and fall, without a fixed pattern. Relationships are changeable. Yesterday's flattery may turn into today's conflict. Nothing is under our control. Sentient beings are constantly driven by karma. This is all-pervasive suffering. The suffering of suffering. As the karmic force of our body and mind grows stronger, all-pervasive suffering becomes more evident and intense. As all-pervasive suffering intensifies and continues, compulsion turns into affliction. This feeling of affliction is known as the suffering of suffering. Human beings experience 8 types of suffering of suffering. The suffering of birth. When a newborn's skin is touched by the wind, it feels as if being scraped by a knife. We may forget about the suffering of birth. There are many aspects to this suffering, not just this one. The suffering of aging. As people gradually age, the energy channels in their bodies become blocked. Their essence, energy and spirit decline, and their bodies become old. This is the suffering of aging. Everyone experiences it as they age. As for the suffering of illness and death, there is no need to elaborate, as there are countless instances of them. The suffering of not getting what one wants. It is the suffering that arises from the compulsion of our attachment. The suffering of separation from what one loves. This is the suffering experienced when we leave our loved ones, or lose or break our loved items. The suffering of encountering what one dislikes. This is the resentment, hatred, irritation, anger, and vexation that arise in our body and mind when we meet enemies, adversaries, or those we dislike. The suffering arising from the 5 aggregates. The Buddha divided the human body and mind into 5 components, known as the 5 aggregates: form, feeling, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. The aggregate of form primarily refers to the 5 sense faculties: the eye, ear, nose, tongue, and body. The body we rely on for our existence is the instrument that creates the 3 types of suffering. It is the residence of suffering. The aggregate of feeling is the reception and experience of favourable and unfavourable circumstances by the body and mind. It can be categorized into 3 types: the suffering of suffering, the suffering of change, and neutral feelings, neither suffering of suffering nor suffering of change. It is the container of the 3 types of suffering. The aggregate of perception generates various delusions and the 3 types of suffering. It is the basis of suffering. The aggregate of mental formations arises from the mind that engages in various actions. Formation means action. It is the creator of the three types of suffering. The aggregate of consciousness is the mind that knows and discerns external objects. It is the knower of the three types of suffering. Let's explain the suffering arising from the five aggregates. When we are well fed, we feel the urge to do something. Even if there is nothing to do, we tend to find something to occupy ourselves with. Some people enjoy physical exercise, and some enjoy dancing, singing, practicing martial arts, or reading books. The karmic habits we have cultivated from past lives and this life determine what we prefer to do. The suffering arising from the five aggregates means there is a strong inclination to do something because the accumulated energy of karmic habits needs to be released. If you ask an ordinary person to do nothing all day except eat, drink, and sleep, they will find it unbearable. Even when they have nothing to do, they will find some activities to engage in, such as drinking tea, chatting, shopping, and travelling. Even an idle person will find something to occupy themselves with. The biggest suffering for human beings is the suffering of illness and death, and the most common suffering is the suffering of not getting what one wants, and the suffering of separation from what one loves. From birth to death, humans are constantly striving to overcome the suffering of suffering. While relieving and reducing the suffering of suffering, have we truly solved the problem? We need to reflect on this question, as it may be something we haven't considered seriously before.